I had just moved into a new home in an area that I was unfamiliar with. I mean, I knew about it beforehand and had visited a few times before making the move, but I didn't really know it. From what I saw on the days I walked around and came by to check out the houses, it seemed very quiet. Not a lot of people out and about, and everyone sort of keeping to themselves. Even on move-in day, when I had the whole moving truck outside and was in and out of the house constantly, nobody came out or introduced themselves or anything. I didn't mind, I was usually the quiet neighbor anyway, but I just noticed it seemed everyone else here was the same way. Made it hard to truly tell what kind of people lived around me. This started on the second day after the move. I still hadn't started my new job yet, and was still working on getting the house organized and unpacked. I spent basically all day inside, partly because it was snowing outside, but mostly because I was stressed with all the boxes around and wanted to get it done as fast as possible. I went to bed early, around 8 or so. When I woke up, I very quickly realized it wasn't morning. I rolled over and saw it was 2 a.m. And just when I was going to question why I woke up, I heard this strange scraping sound. It was muffled and followed by an airy thump sound. Then, a few seconds later, there was a scrape, and then another thump, over and over. Eventually, I got up from bed, still having no idea what I was hearing. I walked over to the window and looked down toward the front yard of my house. There was a man in my driveway, shoveling the snow. He moved back and forth, scraping up a line of snow and tossing it off the driveway. He was covered fully in dark winter clothing, so I couldn't tell much about him. I probably stood there in the window watching him for 2 or 3 minutes. To be honest, it kind of creeped me out. I know I just moved there, and maybe this guy was trying to do a nice gesture for me, but at 2 a.m., and without ever even talking to me. After those few minutes, I left the window and went downstairs, putting my shoes and a jacket on, and opening the front door to introduce myself and just figure out what was going on. But when I stepped outside, he wasn't there. He had just left all of a sudden, coincidentally as soon as I left the window. And it's not even like he finished shoveling. Half of the driveway was still covered, and it looked like the man had stopped midway through shoveling a section. I stood out there and looked all around, but every house was dark, and the entire neighborhood seemed to be quiet and asleep. Noticeably, no other driveway was shoveled either. After a minute, I went back inside, got in bed, and slept until morning. I spent the whole next day inside unpacking again, half expecting that guy to show up at my door to introduce himself, but he never did. It snowed on and off that day too, covering the whole neighborhood with another blanket of snow, and honestly, I thought I would never really get an answer as to what that guy was doing. I stayed up later, now with my TV set up, but still exhausted, I went to bed around 11. And again, I woke up a little past 2 a.m. That same muffled scraping sound filled the silence. I got up and hurried to the window. It was the same man, slowly shoveling my driveway. This night, I wasted no time hurrying downstairs, getting dressed, and walking out the front door. But it was like the man knew somehow, because, again, he was gone. No signs of him anywhere. The longer I stayed outside in the cold, the more this eerie feeling crept into me. I waited 15 more minutes in case he came back, but went to bed afterward. This went on for several more days. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to that same sound, check the window and see him out there slowly, almost creepily, shoveling. I had stopped trying to go outside though, and would just try to go back to sleep instead. I didn't know what to do about it. Maybe he had some weird connection to this house, or the previous owners, or didn't even know I moved in. And despite having a really bad feeling and being creeped out, it's not like I could really call the cops about it. What would I say? Some man shows up and shovels my driveway for me every night for free. It sounds like a joke. I swear though, something about the way the man moved, and would constantly disappear when I went out there, was disturbing. I knew that something wasn't right. I think it was on the 6th day that I woke up again in the middle of the night to the same shoveling sounds outside. And despite knowing who it was and what I'd see, I still got up from the bed and walked over to the window. But just before I reached the window, the sound abruptly stopped. And when I looked out, he wasn't there. I was absolutely sure that he couldn't have run away that quickly. There was less than a second between me hearing the sound stop and me reaching the window. I knew that he was still out there, though the driveway was fully shoveled. And even after a couple of minutes, I didn't hear anything else. It was like he knew that I was at the window. Tired and frustrated, I ran downstairs, threw on my coat and boots, and swung open the front door to go look around. I almost fell backwards. The man was standing on my porch, just a foot away from the door. He was tall, holding the shovel to his side. The man had a thick, scraggly beard and shoulder-length, wet black hair, and his eyes stared at me intensely. He looked extremely sleep-deprived and sickly. I couldn't even move or speak a word for a couple of seconds, still absolutely horrified. And this absolute horror I was in only seemed to get worse when I realized he wasn't moving or speaking either. He just stood there on my porch, staring at me from a foot away. I finally controlled myself and managed to ask what he was doing. His eyes tensed even more, like they were heavier, staring into me. Then he turned and walked off the porch. I stayed in the doorway, watching him walk down to the driveway, then to the road, and seemingly continue down the road for as far as I could see. I was scared and confused and still in shock. I closed the door. This time, I really thought about calling the cops, but I knew that I'd get nothing from it. The man was already gone. I still didn't know who he was, and at the end of the day, he really hadn't done anything yet. So I'd be calling just on the feeling that this was something bad, and that something would happen, which I knew the cops wouldn't take seriously. So, again, I went back upstairs and went to bed. The next day, it didn't snow at all, and with the house all set up, I was able to relax for most of the day. I still felt uneasy about everything, and not having anyone to talk to about it and being in an area that I wasn't familiar with just made it even worse. Eventually, the sun went down and I went to bed. That night, I woke up at 2 a.m., just like all the other nights, except there weren't any sounds. My body seemed to have just been used to waking up at that time, anticipating the man shoveling outside. I laid there awake for a few minutes, listening to how eerily quiet it was. I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep, and that's when I heard something below me. A very quiet thump. It was so quiet, I was surprised I even heard it. And it wasn't concerning on its own. It sounded like nothing more than the house settling. But with everything else going on, and it being 2 a.m., just like all the previous nights, I felt like I had to be sure. I listened for another minute, not hearing anything more, but knew I couldn't sleep without checking. I got up and walked downstairs. My eyes were dead focused on the front door as I walked down the hallway. I got up all the way to the door, still staring at it, before I realized something was in the side of my view. I slowly turned my head toward the living room. The man was standing there in the middle of the room with his back facing me, holding the shovel. He was motionless, like he didn't know I was there, or didn't care. It was almost pitch black in that room, too, so he was just standing in the pitch dark, not moving at all. I ran back upstairs, locked myself in, and dialed 911. But the house still remained eerily silent. An officer arrived 5-ish minutes later. He found the back door open and no one else in the house with me. I explained everything, and the officer filed my report, but there was no real investigation. I don't really know why, as it was clear this man had broken in, and I had a fairly good description of him, but that was where it was all left at. I don't know what was wrong with that man, why he was doing what he was doing, or what he wanted from me. I think from the way he looked and the creepy nature of him showing up in the middle of the night every night, it was only a matter of time before things escalated even further. I had a couple friends back home mention he could have been sleepwalking because of the way I described his almost lifeless way of moving, and how repetitive and consistent everything happened every single night at the same time. But I still think this is a stretch. Either way, if that was the case, it's still incredibly creepy and would have been very dangerous. If I said anything or woke him up or tried to stop him, it could have triggered violent behavior. But none of this explains how he somehow knew every time I left the window and went downstairs. Whatever was really going on, I'll never know, because I moved away a few months later. Last autumn, I moved to a small cabin in the woods. It had been a dream of mine for a long time, and finally, after getting a remote job and with regular home prices being through the roof, it actually made sense to go live in a cheap, small place away from everything. Because I knew the drive-in was rough, and the cabin was small, I basically got rid of everything I owned and only brought the essentials, so the move was quick and easy. The guy I bought the cabin from was a young man who was selling his parents' cabin that he didn't want anymore. He said it was well taken care of, and even had some renovations done to it to make it more livable and up to a modern home's standards. From the outside, it still looked very rugged though. On the day I moved in, around sunset, I got an unexpected visit from a man. He introduced himself as Chandler, living in a neighboring cabin in the same area of the woods as me. He was a 40-ish, average-looking guy, and extremely friendly. Over the top, honestly, but I didn't get the feeling that he was faking it. After chatting for 15 minutes, he asked if I would show him around the inside of the cabin. I agreed only because it was mostly empty, and he seemed like he was just curious about the place. He walked around. I mean, it was a small place, so it only took a few minutes to see the entire cabin. But after all the chatting and the tour, the sun was already down, and so naturally I figured he'd see himself out. However, he took a seat on the couch and kept talking. I was still standing up by the door, and being taken aback that I even had to say something, I told him it was getting pretty late and he should probably head back home. He smiled and apologized, getting up and thanking me for the chat, then walked out. He didn't seem to drive here, so I guess he just walked through the dark back to his cabin. I was a little weirded out by the last couple minutes of that interaction, but I told myself I was overreacting, and that he was just friendly, and maybe didn't catch on to the fact that it was late and he should probably just leave. I built up the fireplace and figured out how to use it. then laid back on the couch and tried to decompress. It was interesting just how quiet it was inside the cabin. Just the fireplace crackling and nothing else. A while later, I passed out right there on the couch. When I woke up, the fireplace was still burning, so I'd guess it was no more than 2 hours later. The whole cabin was dark and quiet. I got up and stretched, then headed into the kitchen to get some water and figured I'd probably just shower and go to bed. But while I was filling up a glass, I heard a slight shuffling sound outside the cabin. Close, like just by the front door. I stopped and listened. Not hearing anything for a whole minute, I ended up going to the door and pushing the small curtains aside. This door didn't have a peephole, but was more old-fashioned, having these small windows with little curtains covering them. When I pushed those curtains aside, Chandler was standing right there on the porch. He was visibly startled when I looked at him, and I was probably just as startled. He quickly tried to laugh it off, though, and said he was just about to knock, in that same over-the-top friendly manner. Had to be almost 9 p.m. at this point, so I was very creeped out and unsure about this. Not to mention, I heard him out there for a minute before I went up to the door, so he definitely wasn't just about to knock. Who knows how long he was out there for. "What are you doing back here?" "It's really late, Chandler." I looked behind him as I said that, noticing again he didn't seem to have driven here. He laughed again and said that he just wanted to see if I'd like to join him at his campfire that he was having back at his cabin. I was absolutely not going to, but I asked where his cabin even was. I know he told me it was around here, but I wanted to know where, just so I had an idea of how close he was to me. He pointed at one of the trails that led away from my cabin and said it was just a mile down there. The trail was unsettlingly dark. The whole forest, actually, was completely black. I said no thanks and that I just wanted to chill at my new place for a few days, preferably alone, although I appreciated the gesture. He stayed smiling and said no worries and that he totally understood, but instead of leaving, he looked past me at the fireplace. "Why don't we just hang around here then? I see you've already got a fire going." Now I was even more creeped out, but in a more worried way. I said no in a very strict, stern voice and closed the curtain. I could see his outline standing outside the door still. He stayed there for a strangely long time before finally walking off the porch. I then went back up to the window and watched him walk into the woods, disappearing almost immediately in the dark. I noticed my heart was pounding. That really had me scared for a minute, the way he was being so pushy, trying to get me to follow him out there in the middle of the night. I'd never been on that trail, or really had any way to confirm that that's where it led to, so he really was asking me to follow him through the woods in the dark. It gave me a really bad feeling. I went back to the kitchen with my glass of water, and just stood there for a few minutes to take it all in. And that's when I heard a loud crack sound resonate through the entire forest. Took me a couple seconds to realize it was a gunshot. I ran up to the door and opened it, looking out toward where I'd heard the shot from. My face went pale. It was in the direction Chandler just went, like somewhere right along the trail. Before I could even process the connotation of what that gunshot meant, Chandler came running out of the forest, sprinting toward my cabin and screaming for help. It was so dark that by the time I saw him, he was already essentially at my doorstep 10 seconds later. I was paralyzed in fear, and he just ran right past me and through the open door into my cabin. No one came chasing him from the woods, though. I turned around and looked at Chandler, hunched over in the hallway, looking at me and saying he'd been shot, sort of holding the side of his stomach. The way he was leaning, though, his shirt was lifted up on one side, and I could see the silver handle of a gun sticking out. My brain was moving at 1,000,000 miles per hour, adrenaline flowing and taking in every detail all at once as I stood there. In one quick motion, I stepped in, grabbed my car key, and ran out to my car. Chandler called my name a couple of times, but didn't try to stop me. I called the police as soon as I was away from the cabin. I then drove to the police station while a different officer went to the cabin to look around. And to make it all more unsettling, he found Chandler still there, sitting on the chair in the living room, apparently looking like he was just waiting for me. The officer cuffed him and tried to question him, but he didn't really say much. With some more digging, it turned out he had no cabin in the area. No address at all, actually, and they didn't even know his real name or identity. And they found his revolver, the one I saw under his shirt, was loaded, but missing a single bullet. It was all him just trying to get into my cabin, and knowing now that he had a gun on him the whole time made it even more horrifying. If I had believed him and went back inside the cabin alone with him, or had followed him out there into the woods, I don't think I'd be here right now. I'd been living alone in this house for just about 2 weeks. I settled in quickly, having moved for work and pretty much starting my new job right after the move. Everything seemed fine. It wasn't anything special, but it was a home nonetheless. The town I was in was the only area I could afford, and I didn't make a ton, so it wasn't the nicest. Of the people I did meet, though, they all seemed like decent people also just trying to get by. Anyway, one night after getting home from work, I walked into the house and was hit by a very strong odor. I had no idea what it was or what it could have been, but it smelled rancid. I walked through the whole house and didn't find anything. And after a few hours, it seemed to go away, so I figured it was nothing. Kinda forgot about it until the following day, when I got home from work again and smelled the same rancid odor. I did a thorough check of the entire house, top to bottom in every room, and while I didn't find anything that could have been the source of the awful smell, I did find something strange. The lock on my back door, which was a sliding glass door, was unlocked. The switch was flipped up. I knew I checked all the doors every night before going to bed, and I hadn't opened that door since I'd moved in, so I couldn't see how it was possible for it to be unlocked. I opened the door and stepped into my backyard. There wasn't all that much to see. The backyard of this house was fenced on the sides, but open in the back, where it was woods. I didn't know if there were houses back there, or if it was just a forest, but at night all I could see were trees. I didn't get any answers. I went back in, shut the door, and made absolutely sure it was locked. I was stumped by that door being unlocked for the rest of the night. Couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew that I kept it locked, but I also knew that if that were true, and the door was unlocked, then someone else had to have done it, which I also wasn't willing to believe. Nothing was missing, and yeah, there was a strange smell, but that wasn't enough to prove to me that something was really wrong. As I sat on the couch and watched TV for the rest of the night, I told myself that now that I was aware of everything, if something else happened, I would know for sure that something was wrong and would call the police immediately. I know I'll get hate for not calling the police right away, but in the moment, I wasn't thinking this was a horror story about to happen. It was just an unlocked door that could have been a simple mistake on my part. Maybe I did go out to the backyard at some point and forgot about it. I really just didn't know. I went to bed several hours later, but I woke up in the middle of the night. I was groggy, and I didn't wake up suddenly. It was more like something gradually woke me up. And as I was gradually waking up, I thought I'd heard this loud scratching sound, like a machine buzzing, but I was still mostly unconscious while I'd heard it. And when I'd opened my eyes, the sound was gone. Right away, though, I noticed a different sound. This constant dripping, echoing through the house, sounded like water dropping from the kitchen faucet, hitting the metal sink tub. It wasn't just a few drops either. It kept going. So I quickly realized I must have left the sink handle slightly open. Wasn't sure how I didn't realize that before bed, but I didn't really think too much about it. I was still partially asleep and not thinking straight. I dragged myself out of bed and walked down the stairs to the kitchen. There were no other sounds in the house, just the dripping water. As I got closer to the sink, though, I started to pick up on that rotten, rancid smell. It was strong enough to wake me up from my half-asleep state I was in. I walked up to the sink. The water was dripping from the faucet just like I'd thought. I pushed the handle in to stop it. However, something was in the sink. I couldn't even tell what it was because I hadn't turned the lights on, and it was completely torn up and disfigured. It smelled horrible, and it looked like someone had been trying to stuff it down the drain, but had stopped in the middle of doing it before getting it all the way down. That's when I moved my eyes to the back door. Even in the dark and a few feet away, I could see that the latch was flipped up and unlocked. It dawned on me that someone was inside my home, probably in the middle of doing something with the sink, and went to hide when they heard me get up. I almost completely disregarded trying to figure out what was going on with the sink, and put all my attention on the person that I knew was inside with me. My eyes darted through every opening of the house. I wanted to turn the lights on, but I didn't want the person to know I was looking for them, or get startled and almost force them to attack me. I retraced my steps, going back into the hallway and slowly getting back up the stairs. I swear it was dead silent in the whole house. I could hear my heart beating. I quietly crept up the wooden stairs, and getting to the upper hall. Almost the instant I got there, sudden loud footsteps thumped through the bottom floor, from the room right next to the kitchen I was just in. I froze up in a panic, completely jump-scared by the sound, even though I was already sure someone else was in the house with me. The person's footsteps stopped right in the kitchen, and I heard them struggling with something, which I can assume was them forcing whatever the hell that was into the drain. And then a few moments later, the incinerator, or garbage disposal, turned on. Then it went quiet again. I was still frozen, scared to make any noise. Through the silence, I could hear a man's deep, heavy breathing coming from the kitchen. Then his footsteps moved back to the other room. I heard the sound of a garbage bag getting picked up or sorted through, and then the footsteps went back to the kitchen where I heard the back door slide open. Then it shut, and it was silent again. I got to my bedroom and notified the police. Of course, whoever the guy was down there, he had left my home and likely run out to the woods behind my house. What they found inside, though, was extremely disturbing. In the sink, the man had been shoving what investigators seemed to think were animal carcasses down into the drain. Something large, like a deer, that had been cut up into chunks so he could force it into the pipes. Which means that smell from the last few days was him having broken into my home multiple times to continue disposing of this. The big question is why? What was he trying to get rid of so bad, and why at my house? Cops' theory is he thought my home was still vacant, but I don't really buy that. I'd been there for 2 weeks and had furniture and stuff in there. They have no idea why he was doing what he was doing, though. If it was a deer or whatever, then possibly it was to try and get me to leave the home by constantly filling it with that horrible smell, like maybe the person hated me for some reason. But to me, it seems like he was trying to cover something up, getting rid of whatever that was in a way that no one could track. Or maybe he was even trying to frame me for something. I don't have any proof of that, but it's just a wild guess. Even a few years later, and in a different home, that event scarred me enough to have me still waking up some nights, thinking I smell that same rancid odor.
I worked as a babysitter during my college years just to make some extra money without having to have a set work schedule. For the most part, I took care of this one family's 4-year-old boy a couple times a week, as the parents would often have dinner events for work. The boy was quiet, but I appreciated that because he was easy to watch over. He didn't do much besides watch TV and play with toys, and he seemed to like me. This was my 6th time watching after him. I had got to the house just before his parents left, and they explained that they would be back home around 11 tonight, and I needed to make sure that he was in bed by 9. The first few hours went as usual. I watched TV with him and made him a small frozen pizza. After finishing his food, he told me he had to use the bathroom and left for a few minutes. When he returned, he asked me about the shuffling noises coming from the basement. I was confused and immediately turned off the TV. Sure enough, as soon as the TV was quiet, I could clearly hear something moving around down there. It was very faint though, and I couldn't tell what it was. Seeing the boy was clearly scared, I assured him it would be okay and was probably just a small animal that had gotten in. I told him to wait up here while I go down to see what it was. By this point, the shuffling had already stopped. I'd never been in the basement of this house before, as it was unfinished and there was never any reason to go down there, so I was definitely being cautious. I opened the door and turned on the light by the stairs. Then I walked down quietly and turned the light on at the bottom of the stairs too, which lit up the whole room. It was a pretty big space, mostly filled with storage boxes. I walked around, checking behind a few boxes, but after not seeing or hearing anything else, I went back upstairs. The boy was waiting for me on the couch and shot up when he saw me. I told him everything was fine and nothing was down there, and gave him a big hug just to make him feel better. After a few minutes, we had already forgotten about the whole thing. And a couple hours later, it was getting close to 9 o'clock and I started to get him ready for bed. We went upstairs to his room and I made sure he was ready, then said goodnight and went back downstairs. I sat on the couch for probably 30 to 40 minutes just scrolling through my phone before hearing shuffling from the basement again, but this time it was a lot louder. My heart stopped for a second as I listened. Then I heard the bedroom door open upstairs and the boy call out my name. I told him to stay where he was and not to come down. I got up and made my way to the basement door. At this point, I was pretty terrified. I pulled out my phone and had it ready to call 911 as I opened the door as quietly as possible. The shuffling sounded like it was close to the bottom of the stairs now. I reached over and flicked on the lights. Immediately, I slammed the door shut and ran upstairs to get the boy, then went straight out the front door and called 911. I stood across the street from the house, looking at the windows as I waited for the cops to come. I also called the parents to let them know what had happened and to come home as soon as they could. When the police finally arrived, I told them what happened. As I turned on the lights by the stairs, I saw a half-naked man crouching down by the bottom while searching through a storage box. They carefully searched the home and found clear evidence of someone having lived in the basement recently, with piles of trash shoved in boxes, but they didn't find anyone. When the parents arrived, they thanked me for calling them and talked to the police about the situation. About an hour later, I was able to go home as they secured the house and filed the reports. I spent the next few days really shaken up and being pretty paranoid. For a couple of weeks, I kept in touch with the parents to see if there were any updates on the man, but nothing ever came up. Eventually, we lost touch as I no longer wanted to babysit anymore. I think the most terrifying thing about it was that he never got caught, and he could be living in someone else's basement right now without them even knowing. My best friend had a daughter, Sarah, that had just turned 7, and I would occasionally watch her whenever they needed. They lived in a really nice home in Washington, surrounded by trees and mountains. The nearest neighbors were a couple miles away, so I always enjoyed the peace and quiet while staying there. Anyways, my friend had asked me if I could watch Sarah for 2 days while she was going on a business trip. I agreed, and a few weeks later arrived at her house. We talked for a little bit and ate lunch together. Then she finished packing and headed out to catch her flight. I hung out with Sarah for a few hours, listening to her talk about school and her friends. Then I took her out to pick up some dinner and dessert. We got back to the house around 8 and agreed to watch a movie just before bed. I sat on the couch and began scrolling through a list of movies to find one when I hear Sarah ask me, "Who's that?" I look where she's pointing, at the front door, and then hear someone knocking. With the house being so isolated, I never thought anyone would come up to the door. Nervously, I walked over and cracked the door open. There was a tall man standing on the porch. He looked a little surprised when I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned to the left, looking through the crack in the door, then replied, "Sorry, just making sure someone was home." Then he turned away and started walking. Obviously, I found this very strange and a little bit creepy. I closed the door and locked it, then went to the back door and locked it as well. Sarah asked me who it was, and I told her it was just a neighbor, then went back to the couch and started a movie. We both enjoyed the movie, though it was a little bit longer than I had thought. I told Sarah it was time for bed and then followed her upstairs as she got ready. Once she was in bed, I came back down and sat on the couch. It was a little bit after 10 and I wasn't too tired yet, so I figured I'd turn something on the TV and just wind down for a bit before going to bed. As the TV played, I started to hear a crunching sound coming from somewhere. I muted the show and listened more carefully. It was coming from the back of the house. I went over to the back door and turned on the back porch light. Looking around, I couldn't see anything other than an empty porch with trees in the background. I stayed there, listening for a few more minutes before eventually heading back to the couch. I wondered if my mind was just messing with me, as I was a little creeped out by being in a house surrounded by a forest in the dark. I always felt safe during the day and actually really enjoyed it, but as soon as the sun goes down, I'd get a little uneasy. Anyways, I turned up the volume again and decided to lay down as to get myself more sleepy. Apparently it worked too well, and I fell asleep on the couch shortly after. A couple hours later, I woke up, noticing the TV was still on. I turned it off and sat up, rubbing my eyes tiredly. But then I started to get an uneasy feeling again, as I noticed how silent it was in the house. There wasn't any sound at all. Then I began to hear that same crunching sound, but this time clearly sounding like footsteps. It was coming from the right side of the house, which was right by the room that I was in. A few seconds later, they stopped, seemingly right outside one of the windows that had the curtains down. Truly frightened, I walked over to the window slowly and quietly, and pulled back the curtain. Nothing was there. I looked around and didn't see anything. I figured I had been imagining it and was just really tired, so I got a glass of water and headed upstairs to get to bed. The next morning, I made us some breakfast and we sat down together to talk about what we wanted to do today. But as we were discussing plans, Sarah asks me why I was walking around outside last night. I froze for a moment, then asked her what she saw. She said she had heard someone walking around the house for almost an hour just after she had gone to bed. Chills ran down my body, and I told her to stay inside while I went to look around outside. I grabbed a small knife just in case and went out the front door. Walking around the house, it was hard to tell if anything was from last night or had already been there. But I did notice some scratches on the walls near some of the windows and doors, but other than that, everything seemed normal. I couldn't tell if there were any footprints, as the yard was mostly thick grass. As I made my way back to the front door, I saw that same man from yesterday walking down the street in front of the house. He was just walking past, but again, this house was pretty far from anything else, so he had to have walked a couple miles at least just to get there. I went back inside and told Sarah that we were going to go to the mall today and walk around. I really didn't want to be in the house anymore, so I wanted to spend as much time away as possible. We stayed out for a while and didn't get back to the house until 6. My friend called me soon after just to check up on us. I mentioned the strange man that I had seen and described his features to her, and she actually said that she recognized the man from a few weeks ago. Apparently he had come up to her house and asked if he could stay the night, to which she obviously declined. We agreed that if anything else happened, I wouldn't take any chances and would call the police. As the sun started to go down, I made sure to check all the doors one last time to make sure that they were locked. It was around 9 p.m., and Sarah and I were playing a quick board game before bed when we both started to hear a soft tapping noise coming from outside one of the windows. I stood up slowly and told Sarah to stay calm. But then a loud scratching came from outside the walls of the house, right by the window in the room we were in. I grabbed Sarah and ran into the garage. We got in the car and I backed out of the driveway as quick as I could, making sure the garage fully shut before driving off. I couldn't see much in the darkness as we were leaving, but Sarah said that she saw someone running into the trees behind the house. I pulled into a hotel parking lot and called the police to report the incident, then called my friend to let them know what had happened. We were met 10 minutes later by 2 officers at the hotel, and they informed us that 2 more were at the house looking around. I told them everything and gave them a description of the man, and eventually they left. We ended up staying in a room at the hotel for the night. The next morning, my friend called and said her flight was just landing and she would be back in an hour, so we headed over to the house. We waited in the driveway for her to arrive, then we all went in together to make sure it was safe. I stayed for a few hours just to talk about everything, and then I said goodbye and went home. It was definitely one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. But fortunately, the man was caught a month later after having been reported by multiple people for trying to break into their homes. What scares me the most about the guy was that he never said what his reasoning was for his actions. He had apparently broken into one of the homes, but he didn't steal anything at all. He just looked around for a little bit and then left empty-handed. It always makes me wonder what he was actually trying to do on the night he tried to break in. When I was 13, I had a babysitter that would come once a week, as my mom would work late every Saturday night. I always thought I was too old to have a babysitter still, and hated having to have someone watch over me all the time. The main person my mom would have over was a 20-year-old guy, Thomas, that was the son of one of my mom's work friends. This guy was really weird, and I didn't like him at all. He didn't talk much and just acted really awkward and strange, but whenever he interacted with my mom, he would act extra nice and talkative. I would bring it up with her, but she'd always say I was just trying to get rid of him so I could be alone. Anyways, it was a normal Saturday night, and Thomas had just arrived, a little late as usual. My mom talked with him for a little bit and then headed to work. I walked over to the couch and turned on my Xbox to play some video games just to pass the time. I'd usually go to bed at 10, so I'd have to spend 4 or 5 hours with Thomas. Most of the time, I'd find something to do alone, because he'd never really talk to me and would just hang out in the kitchen or in our loft area. And today was no different. He stayed in the kitchen for a little bit, and after a few minutes, I heard him talking to someone. I tried to listen as best I could, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. The kitchen was right behind the living room that I was in, but he was talking really quietly. He went on for a few minutes, and then the talking stopped, followed by him coming into the living room and standing next to the couch. I looked up at him and saw he was holding his phone. Thomas said someone was going to come over, just for a second, and not to worry. I didn't really know how to respond other than to just say, okay. It was pretty weird though, and I knew it was definitely not something any babysitter should do, but I also knew that there was nothing I could really do about it. The next 20 minutes were really awkward, as he didn't take out his phone or anything. He just sat there on the couch with me, looking around and not saying anything. He would rarely ever be in the same room as me, so this was pretty out of the ordinary. Our living room was right by the front door though, so I guess he was just waiting for the person to get here. Eventually, a car pulled into the driveway and a man came knocking at the door. Thomas shot up and went over to the door, then stood right in front of it for a moment before turning to me and telling me that he'd be back in just a minute. Then he opened the door and walked outside and shut the door behind him. This whole situation had me curious as to what was going on with him. The blinds on the windows were cracked open just enough for me to see the two of their shadows as they moved around in the driveway. I could tell that the man handed Thomas a large bag and then got in his car and drove away. A few seconds later, I heard the lid of the garbage can outside slam shut, followed by Thomas coming back inside through the front door. The whole interaction seemed odd, and I couldn't help myself from asking him what it was all about. Thomas replied, telling me that it was just his friend and that he left his wallet at his friend's house last night, so he was just dropping it off. I could tell there was something wrong with the way he answered, and it didn't explain the large bag I saw him holding, but I didn't want to question him any further, so I just said okay and went back to playing my game. But things got a lot more strange as the night progressed. During the next hour, I could hear Thomas having multiple phone calls with someone in the kitchen, and at one point, he went into the far loft area where I could hear him raising his voice. Still though, I couldn't make any sense of what he was saying. After maybe the 5th or 6th call, the same car from earlier pulled into the driveway again, and Thomas immediately ran outside without saying anything. I could tell from their body language and the way that they were moving around that they were clearly arguing about something. Then Thomas left for 30 seconds, and then came back with the bag from earlier. The man took it and put it in his back seat, then drove off in a hurry. Thomas came back inside, and I could see the frustration on his face. He went over to the kitchen and didn't come back until 10, when he told me I had to go to bed. I got ready and laid in bed while Thomas stayed downstairs. He would usually stay until my mom got home at 12, but just a few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I waited for 10 minutes, then got up and went downstairs to see if he was still there, but sure enough, he had left. I looked out the window and his car was gone too. I stayed up in bed for a few hours to wait for my mom to get home, and then told her everything that had happened. She seemed to believe me this time, as she also thought it was strange and really unprofessional to leave the house before she came home. The next day, she tried calling him, but he didn't answer. Eventually, though, she got a hold of her friend, who was Thomas's mom, and asked what happened, and she said that Thomas came home feeling sick. We both knew that was a lie and didn't make much sense, as he could have just called her and told her he wasn't feeling well. Anyways, it's been almost 10 years since all that happened, and I still find myself thinking about how weird that night was. I always wonder what the two were arguing about, why he left, and what was in the bag.
I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while, I wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and I was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of r/IMA, and thought that people might want to know what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, Maybe. Maybe it would make him angry, maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. Sorry if that makes no sense, I just don't know how else to explain it, but I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have a hidden camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got the wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet. There were no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and answers from the AMA. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the German version of Am I the Asshole? His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or in my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out, I realized that it wasn't a good idea at all and could have ended badly for me, but luckily he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones, not actually, just made to look that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumpled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time. Finally, thanks, and told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave any letters/gifts for about another week and a half, but 8 days ago it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me and how I haven't been appreciating his effort. Also how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and I was just going to make my boyfriend call the police. But then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, the light smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. "It's time soon," with my last name. I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just mad at this point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, letters, gifts, photos, even the damn glass under my doormat, is just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car is useless to me now, and that threat scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police said they took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it's not enough. And they told me they'll look into it further and promise to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, somebody rang the doorbell just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant. I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else entering the building after them before the door fell shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m. So he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop car since there's a little window up there and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now, at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now, I finally got some peace.
It was New Year's Eve when my coworker Derek asked if I could house sit for the weekend and watch his dog while he visited family upstate. Derek had started only a couple months back, but I had grabbed lunch with him a few times and he seemed like a decent lad. Besides, the idea of a quiet night making some extra cash sounded better than fighting crowds at some bar at 35. Derek left Saturday morning and said he'd be back late Sunday. He gave me the instructions while handing over the keys. I was supposed to feed Bella twice a day, let her out in the fenced backyard, and not let her jump on the furniture. Bella was a sweet-tempered, small husky mix, so it felt like easy money at first, until I took her out back to the fenced yard to run around at 6 that evening. At first she was happy playing fetch, but then she spotted a squirrel near the back fence and squeezed through a gap I hadn't noticed. It was a section where the chain link had come loose from the post. Before I could grab her collar, she was gone, crashing through the brush into the woods behind the property. I went after her. The woods weren't deep, maybe 50 yards before they opened onto a neighboring street, but it was getting dark and cold. I called her name, stumbling over roots and dead branches, and finally found her sniffing around a fallen log about 100 feet in. But when we got back to the house, I noticed the back door was open, swinging slightly in the wind and hitting the frame. My skin crawled. I was sure I closed it, but maybe the latch hadn't caught, or the wind had pushed it open, I thought. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, yet I still checked the front door, which was still locked, and did a quick walkthrough of the house. Nothing seemed disturbed. I chalked it up to my own carelessness and tried to shake off the unease. Later that night, my girlfriend Clara came over. Derek knew about it and said it was fine. She got off work after midnight and drove straight there. We settled into the living room with some wine and watched the ball drop on TV. Bella was curled up at her feet. Around 1, we decided to head to bed. Clara wanted water first, so she went to the kitchen while I took Bella to the spare room. I was just setting up the futon when I heard Clara's shrieks. I ran out and found her on the kitchen floor near the doorway, half slumped against the cabinet. One hand was clamped over her mouth, the other braced on the tile as if she'd barely caught herself. Her eyes were fixed on the back of the house. Through the glass, I saw a figure already moving away. They weren't tall, maybe 5 feet something, wearing a dark hoodie and a plain white mask that made them look like a mannequin. They vaulted the deck railing and disappeared into the darkness below. A second later, we heard the thud of them hitting the ground, followed by footsteps tearing through the underbrush. Claire grabbed my arm and said it had been inside, standing right there when she turned on the kitchen light. And said it had been inside, standing right there when she turned on the kitchen light. And said that it had shoved past her before running for the door. That was when I noticed the crowbar near the back door. It had been dropped on the hard wood. The metal was scuffed where it had stuck the frame. Whoever it was had brought it with them, and they'd been close enough to use it. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called 911. The dispatcher kept us on the line while 2 patrol cars were silent. We locked ourselves in the spare bedroom with Bella, who was pacing and whimpering. Every creak of the house made my heart race. The police arrived within 12 minutes. 2 officers cleared the house room by room while a third stayed with us. When they regrouped, one of the officers asked if we could come upstairs to Derek's room. They discovered a small camera hidden in the smoke detector, another in the bathroom vent, and one in the guest room where I had been planning to sleep. The lead officer opened Derek's closet. On the top shelf, behind some boxes, were 3 external hard drives and a laptop I hadn't seen before. She said they were going to need to take everything as evidence, and that they would need to contact the homeowner. Clara looked at me and asked what the hell it was. I didn't have an answer. The officers wouldn't tell us what was on the drives. They said the house was now part of an active investigation and that we needed to come with them. We gave our statements separately at the station. They took our clothes, photographed the marks on Clara's arms, and asked the same questions again and again. How did I know Derek? What did we touch? When did we arrive? And when did we last see Derek? We sat in separate rooms for hours while more officers came and went. I tried calling Derek. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later and got the same result. Sometime after sunrise, they let us go. During the follow-up interviews, I learned the hard drives had hours of footage from the hidden cameras of people who didn't know they were being filmed. The detective wouldn't elaborate, but the look she gave me told me it was bad. Derek never came back to work. His desk was cleared out by security the following week. The house went up for sale 2 months later and was sold to a quick buy company for under market value. No one ever told me who the masked person was. The police never followed up about it. My best guess is that it was someone who'd been recorded and returned, prepared to erase the footage, or the man who got them. And if the timing had shifted even slightly, it could have been either Claire or me who would have been erased, or the man who got them. And if the timing had shifted even slightly, it could have been either Claire or me who would have been erased. My husband Tom and I bought the Seaside Motel in October. It was a simple 10-room inn, standing along a cliff overlooking the Pacific. It came with an office and a narrow parking lot that tested your skills every time you pulled in. But it was our dream project, and we thought we could make it work. That New Year's Eve was our first holiday managing the place. We were fully booked by mostly families and couples escaping the crowded beach towns an hour south. By 11:30, things had pretty much settled down. Tom and I locked up the office and started walking back to our unit at the end of the building when we noticed the car. An old Honda Accord was parked at an angle near the cliff edge that I didn't recognize from any of the guest cars that had checked in. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. I squinted and could make out a silhouette hunched over the driver's seat. Tom might have felt the creeps too, because he too slowed down as we got closer. We were only a couple steps away when the engine shut off and a man wearing tattered jeans and a dark hoodie got out. He looked like one of those long-haul truck guys who spent most of their life driving around, but he was extremely pale and thin and smiled shadily. He told us he was looking for a place to crash for the night and asked if we had any availability. I told him we didn't, and gave him the name of a larger motel about 15 miles up the highway instead. He nodded, but instead of getting back in his car, he started asking about our guests. How many families did we have? Whether they had kids? The questions felt wrong and way too invasive, so Tom stepped forward, emphasized that the property was private, and told him if he wasn't a guest, he needed to leave. The man nodded again, mumbled something about figuring things out, got back in his car, and drove off. We watched him turn onto the highway heading north before we went to our room and tried shaking it off. Around 1 a.m, the office phone rang. It was the couple in room 4. They said someone had been knocking on their door, asking if they needed help. When they looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Tom said we check it out. We were putting on our shoes when the phone rang again. This time it was the family in room 7. Someone had tried their door handle. Their kids were awake and scared. We grabbed our phones and flashlights and went outside. The parking lot looked exactly how we left it. All the guest cars were still there in their spots. But tucked at the far end by the cliff was the same Honda Accord. The guy was back. I felt my heart pound in my chest as Tom aimed the flashlight toward the car and called out. But nobody answered, and the car seemed to be empty. We started moving along the building, checking between the parked cars and looking into the darker corners where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. Suddenly, I felt a presence near the edge railing. I flashed the light towards it to find him standing near the edge with his back to us, still as a statue. His hoodie was pulled over, hiding most of his face, but he seemed to be looking down at the water. Tom yelled over at him, asking him what the hell he was doing back here. The guy turned around really slowly. His face looked different than before. It was empty, like nobody was home behind his eyes. Suddenly, he dropped, got straight down on his hands and knees, and started crawling toward us. I screamed. The flashlight fell from my hand as I bolted for the office. My hands were shaking so bad I almost couldn't get the key in the lock. Tom was right behind me, yelling at me to hurry. I got the door open, and we scrambled inside. Tom slammed it shut and locked it just as the man reached the steps. He threw himself against the door so hard the whole frame shook. I called 911 while Tom braced himself against the door, making sure it remained closed. I could see him through the window. His face was pressed up against the door, eyes wide and crazy looking. He was staring with his mouth hanging open. Then he stopped, backed away from the door, turned around, and crawled toward the section of the parking lot that led to the cliff trail. The 911 operator told us to stay inside, said officers were on the way. They arrived maybe 15 minutes later, searched the entire property, but found nothing. One officer asked if we checked the edge of the cliff. Said people had jumped from there before. They searched until dawn. They even brought in a helicopter around 4 a.m. to check the coastline, but it was like the earth had swallowed them whole. We stayed open the rest of the weekend for the guests who'd already paid, but most nights we just sat in the office with the lights on, watching the parking lot and checking the cameras we'd installed the week before. Every time a door closed or someone walked to their car, I jumped. The guests from rooms 4 and 7 checked out early Sunday morning. They said they couldn't feel safe. I refunded them without argument. We sold the motel in August. Couldn't do it anymore. Every time I walked across that parking lot, I saw him crawling between the cars. The police never followed up. I called a few times, but they said without a body or evidence of a crime, there wasn't anything to investigate. Said the man had probably just been on drugs or having some kind of breakdown, but I don't think that's what it was. I think he was looking for something or someone, and when we didn't give him what he wanted, he tried a different approach. But I still wonder if he ever came back. If the new owners ever saw that Honda Accord parked at an angle near the edge. I hope not, but I don't think we were the first. and I don't think will be the last.
Don't take this too seriously. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this, but I'm glad I didn't take the chance. Super creepy nevertheless. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room is cheap, so I knew I wasn't going to stay in a 5-star hotel, but it was only for one night, so I didn't mind as long as I had a bed. To start off, it already wasn't a great trip because my data roaming apparently didn't work in that country at all. I logged into a cafe Wi-Fi and planned my route in advance as best as I could. I managed to be at the house in time, rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang and waited for 5 minutes. I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it. I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. A super dusty couch right in front of the door. Pieces of furniture covered in cloth. Very dirty and extremely old. I usually love old houses, but that just did not look like a house that was in use, or prepared for guests at all. I wondered if I was at the wrong house and what to do now, as a super old, unwashed looking guy walked towards the door from the street. I asked him if he knew where the Airbnb was. He mumbled something which I interpreted as positive, so I asked him if he was Tim, my host. He said yes and opened the door for me. Well, I already described the entrance. The centerpiece was definitely the super old creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house. I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and stinking of cigarettes, which wasn't exactly pleasant, but alright. The second floor was also abandoned looking, super dark with clustered furniture hung with cloth and randomly thrown together, and a super creepy curtain that I couldn't catch a glimpse behind. Another stair up and we were in my hallway, which was honestly the worst one. Cracks in the walls, old rule paintings, and the like. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie. I usually don't have a problem with decor like that. I'm goth, so anything darkly inclined is my jam, but everything looks so badly taken care of that even I got the major creepo vibes from this house. He showed me the bathroom, which had a huge hole missing in the bathtub tiling and the wall. Everything looked super dirty. He showed me to my bedroom, which was honestly okay. There were just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves that threw me off, but the bed seemed fine. I asked him if they had Wi-Fi and he said no, which sucked, because that meant I would have no way to communicate in there. I asked him when checkout was the next day. He said, "It doesn't matter." Like, okay. He then dragged himself up to the 4th story, which was in complete pitch black darkness, by the way, so that gave me very weird vibes. I definitely didn't want to get into the shower, so I just quickly changed and charged my phone. When I went to the bathroom, I realized that I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks, at all. Not for the bathroom, not for the toilet, and not for my room. Which freaked me out. I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that someone looked like guests before me had left there, like shower gels, toothbrushes, and toothpaste. A random lash curler just lay abandoned on the shelf. Not like a here you go for your use in case you forgot yours kind of way, but it just looked like someone left it and nobody bothered to clean it. I already made up my mind that I would definitely not stay the night in this house. My mind was just spinning scenarios. What if all these products were left by people before me? And why did nobody leave horrendous reviews? Because I got murdered? LOL. I was super spooked. I seriously debated if I should take all my shit to the concert because it did not feel safe in the slightest. But my back was really hurting from my heavy backpack, so I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could. Not without sliding a folded paper under the door, so I'd see if someone tried to open it in my absence. When I was coming down the staircase, I heard someone turning a key in the front door. I was a bit confused, but in the advert, it said that a couple lived there, so I expected to see the wife or girlfriend of the guy I already met. Instead, a middle-aged man enters and says, "Hey, I'm Tim." All I could think of, then who the heck is that other guy? I was shitting myself inside, but had brief small talk with him and finally left the house. I was shook. Luckily, I made it in time to the venue and the concert was worth it. Afterwards, I was so tired that I knew I couldn't stay awake for the whole night, so I checked into a hostel. That was also not perfectly clean, but at least they had Wi-Fi, a proper shower, and a door that had a lock. The next day, I got thrown out at 10 a.m., so I made my way to get the rest of my stuff. I don't know why, but I checked the mail slot again and jumped back. The old guy was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. I tried my best not to wake him up and snuck into my room to get my stuff. The door hadn't been opened, thankfully, and I finally left this crazy place. I don't know if I overreacted, but honestly, from the 2 temps to the missing locks and a checkout that didn't matter, if I assumed the worst, this would have been the perfect setup to assault or murder someone. Best case scenario, nothing would have happened, but I probably would have had panic attacks all night. Usually I love solo traveling, but this was just too much.
In my first year of college, I struggled to meet people, and in my desperation, I made a mistake I'll never make again. At the time, I couldn't afford to go to the main university in town that all my friends went to, so I was going to community college. None of the people in my classes were open to hanging out, and I was too anxious to go to bars or parties by myself. With no other real options, I decided to take a chance on a couple dating apps. I didn't get any matches for a few weeks, but then, randomly, a girl followed me on Instagram and messaged me. She said she found me on Tinder, but I looked and still didn't have any matches. When I asked her about it, she texted back quickly, explaining that she didn't swipe right because she just wanted to be friends, not hook up. This was better than nothing, so I went ahead and followed her back. Then we started texting back and forth. In between texts, I stalked her profile, trying to figure out if she was a bot or a catfish or something. She had a long posting history, plenty of followers, and comments that seemed like genuine people, not spam bots. The only conclusion I could draw was that she was hot and didn't appear to have a boyfriend. However, the more I talked with her, the less I liked her. The conversation felt very one-sided. Like she was asking a bunch of questions about me but not giving good answers to my questions. She wouldn't even say what school she went to, which bothered me even more because I'd already told her where I was going. Eventually, I decided to leave her undelivered for a while. She reacted by spamming my phone with 20 back-to-back messages. That's when I decided it would be best to cut my losses and block her. But that still wasn't the end of it. Within minutes, I got texts from 3 or 4 different accounts. These were obviously just fake alt accounts of hers, especially because they were all sending the same message. Unblock me now or I'll make you. All I could do was block the alt accounts until they stopped coming. Afterwards, I was feeling depressed and restless, so I decided to hit the gym. It was a short walk from my apartment, which was very convenient, but when I got there, I realized something I didn't like. I had told the crazy girl on Instagram that I went to this gym. However, I shrugged it off, thinking the girl probably didn't even live near me. I also didn't want to admit to myself that I was a grown man afraid of a girl I'd never even met, even though it left me on edge through my whole workout. About an hour later, I went home. The Instagram girl was still in the back of my mind, but I was starting to forget. A quick shower helped too. Then I sat down on the couch and put on some TV. Despite trying to unwind though, I kept hearing a weird noise. I paused the video, yet I kept hearing the sound for just another second before it stopped. It came from right outside my front door. Without making any noise, I stood up and went to the door. I looked through the peephole and saw someone on the other side. They were hunched down, wearing a hat and a hood, looking around like they were trying to find a way through. Not sure what else to do, I just shouted as loud as I could and told them to go away. They didn't even panic. Instead, they just calmly looked away, seeming to make sure to not look up so I couldn't get a decent look at their face. I couldn't tell if they were male or female, what color their skin was, or even how tall they were, but I had a feeling it was related to the girl I blocked on Instagram. Was she sending people after me, or was that her? I had no clue, but I was starting to believe their threat was serious. I didn't want to think about how they planned to make me unblock her. I waited a minute or two before opening the door, peeking my head to make sure they were out of the hallway. Then I grabbed my keys and went to the front office. I met with the security guard there and asked him if he'd seen anyone break into the building. He looked through the security cameras for a few minutes, but he said he wasn't allowed to show them to me, which makes me think he wasn't actually trying to look. After a lackluster investigation, he said he didn't see anyone out of the ordinary. Nobody had tampered with the key fob sensors to get into the building, and nobody suspicious was around. At my request, he went back to my apartment with me to check the surroundings. Aside from some disturbed mulch around my window, there was no evidence anyone had tried to get in. Frustrated, I asked him to keep an eye out for me and let him go. Then I went back inside my apartment, triple checking that everything was locked. I went around to see if anything had somehow been stolen, but nothing was missing. In fact, it was the opposite. Something was added, a slip of paper under my door, which that person must have slid through before I even noticed they were there. It was a handwritten note, one that didn't look like a woman had written it. There was no direct threat, but a list of all the pieces of information about me I had foolishly given away or let be discovered, thinking I was talking up a girl. At the end, a crude smiley face, and next to it, the message, "See you soon." I kept the note, but I didn't contact anyone about it. I felt like I was being played for a joke. That's what I tell myself now, that it was all a joke, that it was all just a joke. For all I know, it could have easily gone way further. Maybe someone else dealt with this person, but didn't end up as lucky as I did. I've been on Instagram for years, but nothing so disturbing as this has ever happened to me until now. I scroll through it all the time, though I rarely post. I'm not interested in becoming an influencer with a bunch of followers or anything like that. Whenever I get random DMs from creeps or bots, I usually just ignore them. Sometimes, though, I get a little curious. I might think about replying with something funny, or I'll look through their account to see what kind of person they are. One day, I got a notification that was a little different. Instead of messaging me, a strange account tagged me in the comments section of a random person's post. The post was just a slideshow of some memes that weren't really funny, but I didn't follow the person who posted it. Their page was more of the same, nothing interesting. However, I also didn't follow the account that tagged me, and when I looked into them, I found something disturbing. They had dozens of posts, each with multiple pictures, all of which seemed to be taken of random people in public without their knowledge. It was like a bunch of confessions of some stalker with a camera. There was a picture of someone eating lunch, then getting onto a train, and walking into a building in a different part of town, presumably their home. At first, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Sure, it was creepy, but not exactly highly unusual for the internet. I also considered the idea that it was all staged to look like the subjects didn't know they were being recorded, like an art student doing a bunch of candid photographs. I wanted to see what my best friend thought, so I sent them the account. It didn't take them long to get back to me with a much stronger reaction than I thought. They told me to look more closely at one of the posts. Then I realized it wasn't just random people. I was one of them. I was featured on this creep's page. The post was from just a few hours ago, but I recognized the outfit I was wearing 2 days before this all happened. It was pictures of me at my job, then getting out and having a drink before going home. This person not only knew where I lived, they basically tracked my entire routine, and because of the timing, it was clear they wanted me to know I was being watched. With this revelation, I started to freak out. What the hell was I supposed to do if I didn't have a single lead on who this person was? I'm not some sort of hacker who can trace people's locations through their phones. I didn't even realize someone was taking pictures of me until they started taunting me with them. Obviously, I reported the account right away, but I knew doing that was about as effortless as it was pointless. I kept talking with my friend about what I might be able to do. We were considering calling the police, but as I kept anxiously refreshing the page, I made another deeply unsettling discovery. There was a new post, 10 more pictures. This time, they were all of me. Some were more recent, from just the day before, as I was leaving for work in the morning, but some of them went back weeks, to the point I couldn't remember exactly when they took place. Whoever this person was, they were still tracking me, and I had seemingly become their favorite subject. Those other people, the ones in the previous posts, as much as I wanted their help, I had no way of finding out who they were. Feeling like I was in genuine danger, I finally called the police. They took the name of the account. They gave me a case number and told me to contact them later or wait for an investigator to reach out. Despite my doubts that they wouldn't take me seriously, I held out hope. My friend came over to stay the night, which I greatly appreciated. I felt much better with her around. The last thing I wanted to be was alone. In the morning, I felt slightly better. After the initial shock wore off, I figured we might be able to catch this guy. Except when I went to check the account again, my heart sank. The page was gone. I didn't know if they had blocked me, deleted their account, or got deactivated from being mass reported by their victims. Either way, I knew if I could no longer see it, that meant the police most likely wouldn't be able to view it either, meaning there was no more evidence. That person still had all those pictures of me, probably including a bunch of stuff that was way worse than what they posted. They still knew where I lived, worked, who I hung out with, my whole routine, and they just vanished. With no way to find them, I can't stop them. They could still be watching me now. My friend still tries to tell me that it was probably all just some weirdo photographing random people. I would have a better time believing it if they hadn't singled me out in their final post. Nobody else in that account got posted twice. Just me, whoever that creep is. I think they wanted to get to me most of all. The worst part is, they succeeded. They terrorized me, then got away without leaving me a single answer to my questions. I prefer to have a regular routine, or at least I did, until someone came and completely blew it up. Every weekday I walk to school. When I get out, I always have a bunch of work to do, but instead of doing it at home, I stop by my favorite coffee shop for a couple of hours. I get a drink, then I sit at a table, pull out my laptop and my notebooks, and get things done. Sometimes, maybe once or twice a week, if I'm sitting in my favorite section and the sun is shining through the window nicely, I'll take a picture of my little mobile work setup and post it on my story. I also like to add a song I've been listening to, as well as tag the cafe's Instagram account. By 5 or 6 p.m. on any given day, I'm packing up and walking the rest of the way home, where I allow myself to fully relax. Chores are for the weekends, so I just shower, eat, then lay down and watch TV until bedtime. Like anyone else, I also go through my phone, looking at memes, checking other people's stories, and semi-obsessively checking the likes on my own posts. It's always the same 10 or so people who like my coffee shop updates, but I still always check. One day, though, I saw a name I wasn't familiar with. At first I thought it was a bot, because the username was just Mark followed by a bunch of random numbers. I didn't even remember getting the notification that this guy followed me. They had no profile picture, no posts, no followers, and they only followed 4 people. A few celebrities, then me. If that doesn't scream not a real person, then I don't know what does. So I figured they would get banned in a few days and disappear like every other bot that adds me. Only this time, it didn't. At the end of the week, a few days later, I found myself at the coffee shop again, getting hit by a beam of golden evening sun. Fall was in full swing. The days were getting shorter, and the angle of the sun at that time of day was getting gradually lower. I wasn't really thinking about how it would soon be dark out at 6 p.m., just that it would look great for a photo. So that became my story post for the day. When I got home, I checked the likes on my story as I always do. To my surprise, that random Mark account was the first one on the list with a heart next to it. I didn't think it was any cause for concern, though. I only really got worried when they liked every story post I made the next week, too. I started to really wonder who they could be. I still wasn't convinced they were real, but if they were, I was thinking they were probably someone I knew from school using a different account. That meant they could be anyone. Everyone I was ever rude to, rejected, or did wrong was a suspect. Then again, it was probably harmless, right? After a month of knowing someone was lurking on my Instagram, it became a habit to check for their like every time I posted. I didn't think blocking them would do any good, as they could just make another account. And if nothing changed, I could convince myself nothing was wrong. In late November, I was working at the coffee shop. I had made a post the previous day, but even though I wasn't planning on making another one that day, I still had the itch to check my phone for something. Before I left, I lost my focus and decided to look at the strange account that kept liking my story. Something was different. Instead of saying no posts, the page had gone private. I couldn't see anything, but I suspected something was there. So for the first time, I followed them back. I didn't have to wait long for them to accept my request. Then I was awarded the ability to see their one and only post. To any other person, it would have meant nothing. But to me, it was absolutely chilling. In the picture was a table and a chair, tucked into a corner by the window of a somewhat generic-looking building. Though it wasn't just anyway. I could tell by the placement, the patterns of wear on the furniture, by the damn lighting alone. That was my table. My favorite seat in the coffee shop that I went to every single day, that I posted from multiple times a week. The caption was the most damning part. It just said, her favorite spot. My blood ran cold, and my eyes darted around the cafe. I had been sitting in that seat yesterday, but today it was occupied by someone else. Could it be them? How could I know? I looked around at every other customer, seeing if they looked back at me, pointed a camera at me, anything to give themselves away. Nothing. Just a bunch of painfully normal people. But I knew, somewhere, one of them was spying on me. If they knew I came here every day, they knew plenty more than that, including the fact I walked home in the evening. That day, night was already falling by 6 p.m., and I still had to get home. Suddenly, I felt terrified. I was certain I'd be followed home. And in the darkness, taken. This person obsessed with my routine must have been waiting for the days to shorten, for my reliance on the clock to make me vulnerable. Knowing this, I refused to leave. I called my mom instead. She left work early and picked me up just minutes before the cafe closed, when I would have been forced outside. Ever since then, I stopped doing my homework there. I got rides to and from school, until after a while, when I felt comfortable walking again. But I never make extra stops. I get home well before dark. As for social media, I simply don't post anymore. I archived and privated everything. And of course, I finally blocked the Mark account. Thankfully, nothing has happened to me yet. But I'm well aware that whoever they are, they're still out there. In high school, I used to post on social media a lot. Now that I'm in college, I just don't have the time anymore. All my accounts and profiles are still up, but I'm rarely active. More recently, I've been considering deleting everything and getting off social media altogether. After what's happened, it might be the best thing I can do. A few days before it started, I was looking through some old things. I don't even remember what I was looking for, but during my search, I noticed I couldn't find my old phone, which I kept as a backup in case my new phone ever got lost or broken. Best case scenario, I just forgot to pack it when I moved out, so it was still at my parents' house and it just took me forever to realize, though there was a chance it could have been lost or even stolen out of my apartment. Any of the drunk people I've had over for parties could have taken it, with a good chance they don't even remember who they got it from. However, later that same week, I had to consider a more serious option. Out of the blue, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school messaged me on Instagram. I guess they must have been keeping tabs on me, because they said they had noticed I made a second account. They were wondering if it was like a spam account for close friends that I accidentally left public, or if I had lost the password to my old account. Honestly, I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I never made a second account. I told them so, but they said they could prove it. Then they sent me the link. What I saw next sent me into a panic. It was a new account, of me. It had my name, my face, pictures of me all throughout high school, even things I never posted. Random shots I took of old friends, sometimes clearly inside my parents' house. Having realized just days earlier that I lost my old phone, my first thought was that someone had managed to break into it. They could easily access my camera roll and all the accounts I never changed the password for, and apparently that's exactly what they were doing. Using all that data to impersonate me. To make sure, I opened the location tracking app my parents made me download on both phones, and my heart sank when it didn't show up at my parents' house, my current apartment, nor in some random location miles away, but somewhere nearby. It wasn't home, but it was in town. I was already distraught, but it got worse. As I kept scrolling through this account, I realized not all of the pictures were old. Sprinkled in were new pictures, ones I never could have taken on my old phone, which I hadn't used in several years. They showed the street I lived on, a picture of the school parking lot with my car in the frame, and even a short video of this unknown person walking into a bar I had just been to last weekend. In a matter of minutes, my day went from calm and boring to a total nightmare. I had no idea what to do. I wasn't prepared to engage with this account out of fear that it would make things worse. I thanked the person who brought it to my attention and asked if they knew anything else about it, but they said no. I also didn't forget the possibility that they might have been involved somehow, though I didn't want them to know I was thinking that either way. Afterward, panic settled into insidious paranoia. I tried to relax, take my mind off it with all sorts of distractions, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did this person want? Why me? Isolating myself in my apartment, I double, triple, quadruple checked that my door was always locked. I kept testing it and I could swear it was loose, even though it had always been solid. I couldn't trust my windows either. I lived on the second floor, but a person this determined to torment me could easily get in through them. This restlessness lasted for hours. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I worked up the courage and texted the Instagram account that was impersonating and stalking me, demanding they delete everything immediately. I don't know what I was expecting, but their response was the worst thing I could have thought of. They replied almost instantly. Charlie is the name of my cat. I adopted him as an accidental kitten from a friend in town a few months ago. I never posted about Charlie. I kept him a secret because there's a strict rule against having cats in my apartment. Now I was terrified that this person would report me to my landlord and get me evicted, or worse, do something to hurt my cat. Most of all, I was desperately trying to figure out how they could even know about it. They would have to be a personal friend of mine, one I've spoken to recently, or they had to be watching me physically, not just online. Either way, I was at my wit's end. I called the police and reported the account, but just as soon as I did, it disappeared. I checked the location of my old phone, and it was no longer showing up. I couldn't offer anything else. For weeks I waited for an update from the police, but I never got one. I simply had to try and move on. Life slowly began to feel normal again. Until just the other day, a new account followed me. There were no posts, but the username itself sent me right back into survival mode. It said, "Move back home," with random characters thrown into it. Just a few days ago, I had texted my mom that I was thinking I might want to move back home if something else happens. Turns out they never needed my old phone to spy on me. It can read my texts. I don't know what else to do but disappear off the internet entirely and make sure I'm never alone. I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up with 3 older brothers. I've worked graveyard shifts at gas stations, and I've always been the person in the friend group who laughs at jump scares in horror movies. I tell you this because what I'm about to describe shook me in a way that took months to work through, and I want you to understand that it's not because I'm dramatic. I was 19 when I started babysitting for a woman named Renee. She had 2 kids, a 9-year-old boy named Marcus and a 6-year-old girl named Lily. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, about 15 minutes from my apartment. in one of those subdivisions where every house looks almost identical and the streets are wide and empty after dark. Renee was a nurse working evening shifts at a hospital across town, so I'd arrive around 5 and stay until she got home, usually sometime between 11 and midnight. Marcus was a quiet, serious kid who liked building things with Legos and reading graphic novels. Lily was the opposite, loud, imaginative, constantly inventing games that somehow always ended with me chasing her around the house. I liked both of them. I'd been working for Renee for about 4 months, and genuinely felt comfortable there. The night it happened was a Wednesday in late October. Not Halloween, not that it would matter. But I mention it because the nights had gotten longer and darker earlier, and the neighborhood always felt a little more isolated once the sun went down in autumn. I'd made the kids grilled cheese for dinner, helped Lily through a bath, and was getting her settled when Marcus said something I initially brushed off. There was a man looking in the backyard window earlier. I looked up from tucking Lily's blanket. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. That practiced 9-year-old shrug that means they're trying to seem unbothered. "When you were giving Lily her bath, I was in the living room and thought I saw someone standing on the back porch, looking through the glass." I asked if he was sure, and he said he wasn't. Said it was dark and it might have been his own reflection. I told him it probably was, locked the back sliding door, which I had assumed was already locked, and tried to move on. But I checked that door twice more before I put Marcus to bed at 9:30. By 10 o'clock, I was alone on the couch, television on low, and I was starting to feel that particular kind of quiet that settles into a house after kids fall asleep. The kind of quiet where you start noticing sounds you didn't notice before. The refrigerator humming, the occasional creak from upstairs, and then something else. It was subtle at first, a sound I couldn't immediately categorize. Not a creak, not the house settling, something more deliberate. Like the slow, careful weight of footsteps trying very hard not to be footsteps, coming from the direction of the kitchen. I muted the television. Nothing. Silence. I told myself it was the fridge. I unmuted the TV. It happened again 10 minutes later, and this time I was certain it wasn't the fridge. It had rhythm. It had intention. I sat completely still on the couch and stared at the darkened hallway leading to the kitchen, and I felt something shift in my chest. That animal awareness, the part of your brain that predates language, telling you something is wrong. I got up and turned on the hallway light. The kitchen was empty, but the stool at the kitchen island was pulled out. Not far, maybe 8 inches. I was almost certain it had been pushed in when I made dinner. I always push the stools back in. It was a compulsive habit of mine. Almost certain isn't the same as certain, though, so I talked myself down. I went back to the couch. Then I noticed the glass. There was a glass on the counter near the sink, a clear drinking glass with maybe 2 inches of water in it. I hadn't poured that glass. I had given the kids juice with dinner, and I had been drinking from a water bottle I brought with me. I stood there staring at it for what felt like a long time, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. I called Renee. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I kept my voice low and even. I told her what Marcus had said, what I'd heard, the stool and the glass. There was a pause on her end that lasted too long. And then she said, "Is the back door locked right now?" I said yes. She said, "Check the garage." I asked her why, and she said her ex-husband, Marcus's father, not Lily's, the one she left 2 years ago and had a restraining order against, had a garage door code she'd never gotten around to changing. She said she'd been getting hang-up calls from blocked numbers all week and hadn't thought much of it. She was speaking faster now. I was already moving toward the interior garage door, and she told me not to open it, to take the kids out through the front door and go to a neighbor's house and call 911. I didn't make it to the garage door, because as I turned toward the hallway, I heard the door to the garage click. Not open, just the latch releasing, as though someone on the other side had their hand on the knob and had just decided to stop. I dropped the phone and I moved. I don't fully remember getting up the stairs. I remember grabbing Marcus from his bed and being surprised by how awake he was. Like some part of him was waiting. I got Lily up, got both of them out the front door, left it wide open behind us, and ran 3 houses down to a neighbor I recognized. We were inside a stranger's kitchen when we heard Renee's front door slam shut from down the street. The police came. Renee came 40 minutes later, still in her scrubs. And I remember her hugging the kids in the neighbor's driveway while 2 officers walked through her house with flashlights. They found the water glass. They found scuff marks near the garage that suggested someone had been standing in that narrow space between the car and the wall for some time. One of the officers told me, quietly, that whoever was in there had been in there for a while. I thought about all the sounds I dismissed, all the minutes I'd sat 10 feet from that garage door, watching television, not knowing. They never confirmed it was Renee's ex. No cameras, no prints that meant anything. He denied it. The restraining order was reviewed and strengthened, for whatever that's worth. What I keep coming back to, even now, is Marcus. He saw someone at that back window and told me, clearly, calmly. The way a 9-year-old has already learned to manage fear tells an adult something important. And I locked the door and changed the subject. He knew something was wrong before I did. He'd probably known something was wrong for much longer than that. I don't babysit anymore. I don't say that to be dramatic. I just don't think I'm suited for it. For that particular responsibility of being the last line of protection for someone else's children in a house that isn't mine. In a situation I don't fully understand. Some quiet houses aren't empty. That's the thing nobody tells you until you've already learned it. I want to preface this by saying that I've never actually told this story out loud. Not to my parents, not to my wife, not even to my close friends. Writing it down is the closest I've come to saying it to anyone, and even now my hands feel weird doing it. I'm 31. This happened when I was 10. My parents were close with a man named Dennis. He'd worked with my dad at the same engineering firm for close to a decade. And every few months he'd come over for dinner and watch football and laugh too loud at his own jokes. He was the kind of person who felt very present in a room. Broad, tall, early 40s. The type who always put a hand on your shoulder when he was talking to you. My parents trusted him completely. He was one of those people who adults just seem to decide is safe. My little brother Eli was 7 at the time. When my parents needed someone to stay with us for a long weekend, a cousin's wedding 3 states over. Dennis offered before they even asked. My mom told me later that she felt relieved, like it all had worked out perfectly. He stayed at our house Friday through Monday morning. The first day was fine, more than fine actually. Dennis brought a bag of candy and rented 2 movies and let us stay up past 10. He made us grilled cheese for dinner and watched cartoons with Eli on the couch. I remember thinking he was all right. I remember feeling glad it wasn't some stranger. It was Saturday night that things shifted. I was in my room reading when I noticed the house had gotten very quiet. Eli's room was across the hall from mine, and I could normally hear his TV through the wall. It had gone off. I figured he'd fallen asleep, which was normal for him. I didn't think about Dennis until I realized I hadn't heard the man moving around in a while either. No TV from the living room. No sounds from the kitchen. I cracked my door open and looked down the hallway. Dennis was standing outside Eli's door, just standing there. His back was to me. He wasn't moving. He was just facing the closed door with his hand resting against the frame. Not knocking, not opening it. Just resting his palm flat against the wood like he was checking for heat. I watched him for what felt like a long time. Then he turned and walked back toward the living room. He didn't see me. I told myself it was nothing. Adults check on kids. That's what they do. I closed my door and went back to my book, but I couldn't read. I just sat there with the words in front of me, not taking in any of them. I woke up deep in the night because I heard Eli's voice. He wasn't crying, just talking, the sleepy murmur of a little kid. I sat up, and in the thin light under my door, I could see that the hallway light was on. I got up. Eli's door was open about 6 inches. Dennis was sitting on the edge of Eli's bed. Eli was still half asleep, turned away, and Dennis had his hand on my brother's back, just resting there in the dark. He was talking quietly, too low to make out. When he heard me push the door open, he turned. "Hey, bud," he said, completely calm. "Your brother had a bad dream. I was just checking on him." I didn't say anything. I walked into the room and sat down on the floor next to the bed. Dennis looked at me for a moment and then stood up. He ruffled my hair, said something like, "You boys get some sleep," and walked out. I heard him go down the hall. I heard the guest room door click shut. I sat on Eli's floor for a long time. He fell back asleep almost immediately, his breathing slow and even. I kept the lamp on. Sunday was unbearable in a way that was hard to explain. Dennis acted completely normal. He made pancakes. He taught Eli a card trick. He asked me if I wanted to come watch him wash the car. I said no. He said okay, and that was that. There was nothing I could point to. Nothing I could have described to someone else that wouldn't have sounded insane. A man standing in a hallway. A man sitting on the edge of a bed. A man with his hand on a sleeping child's back. All of it was deniable in a way that made me feel crazy and very, very young. That night I moved my pillow and blanket into Eli's room and told him we were having a camping night. He thought it was exciting. I told him to lock the door. He asked why, and I said it was part of the game. He locked it. I didn't sleep. I laid on the floor and I watched the line of light under the door. And sometime around 2 a.m, I saw the shadow of feet stop outside the door. 2 feet pointed toward the room, standing there. The handle turned once, very gently, and then stopped. The feet stood there for maybe 2 minutes, then the shadow moved away. My parents came home Monday afternoon. I watched Dennis hug my mom and shake my dad's hand, and heard my dad say something like, "Boys give you any trouble?" Dennis laughed and said, "Not at all. They were great." My dad clapped him on the back. I couldn't speak. I just stood in the doorway and watched the man get into his car and drive away. I've thought about Dennis almost every year of my life since then. I've searched his name a few times online and found nothing conclusive. A LinkedIn, some old company directory listings. He retired a few years ago based on what I can tell. I don't know if he has a family. I don't know if there were other weekends with other kids, other houses where something didn't end the way ours did. The part that's hardest to live with is knowing that I made every decision I made as a 10-year-old who barely understood what he was protecting his brother from. I just knew, in some gut level, wordless way, that I had to stay between them. And it worked, and that should feel like enough. But it doesn't. It mostly just feels like luck. This happened when I was 16. The summer of 2015. I'd been babysitting for about a year at that point, so I wasn't exactly new to it. Our next-door neighbors, the Harmons, had a daughter named Mia who was 6 years old. Her parents were good people, quiet, kept to themselves mostly, and Mia was one of those kids who never really gave you trouble. She liked drawing horses and watching the same 3 movies on repeat. Easy work for decent pay. The Harmons called me one Friday evening. They had a wedding to attend about 40 minutes away and didn't want to drag Mia through a late reception. I said yes without a second thought. I'd watched Mia maybe a dozen times before. I knew the house. I knew where everything was. It felt as routine as it could get. What I didn't know was that their house backed up against a stretch of woods, thin, maybe 100 yards deep before you hit the next street over, but dark enough at night that you couldn't see anything past the first few trees. I never really paid attention to it before. I had no reason to. Mrs. Harmon gave me the usual rundown before they left. Bedtime was 8:30. No candy after dinner. Make sure Mia brushes her teeth because she'll tell you she already did when she hasn't. Standard stuff. But then she paused and said something I didn't expect. She told me Mia had been going through a phase lately where she said she could see a man standing in the backyard at night. She said it the same way you describe a kid claiming there was a monster under the bed. Slightly embarrassed, slightly dismissive. She's got a big imagination, Mrs. Harmon said. Just tell her she's being silly if she brings it up. I nodded and didn't think much of it at the time. The evening went fine. We had dinner, watched one of her movies, and I let her draw horses at the kitchen table while I scrolled through my phone. Around 8 o'clock, I started the bedtime routine. Mia was cooperative, brushed her teeth. For real, I watched. Then climbed into bed without a fuss. I turned on her nightlight, that little yellow mushroom lamp on her dresser, and told her goodnight. I was almost to the door when she said it. He's out there again. I stopped. I turned around. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the window across the room. Her curtains were drawn, but there was a gap at the bottom where they didn't quite reach the sill. She was staring at that gap. "Who's out there?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "The man," she said, like it was obvious. "He stands by the big tree." I walked over and pulled the curtain aside and looked out. The window faced the backyard. I could see the wooden fence, the patio, the outline of the big oak tree she was talking about. And beyond that, darkness. Just the woods, nothing unusual. No shapes, no movement. I told her it was probably just shadows from the branches. I told her there was no one there. I pulled the curtain fully shut, tucked her back in, and turned the nightlight up as bright as it would go. She didn't argue. She just watched me leave with this expression I still think about sometimes. Not scared exactly. More like she felt sorry for me. I went downstairs and turned on the TV, but I couldn't focus on it. Something about the way she'd said it, so flat, so certain, no drama, sat wrong with me. Kids who are making things up usually want a reaction. They'll escalate. They'll cry a little. They'll make sure you're paying attention. Mia hadn't done any of that. She just stated it like a fact and let it go. After about 20 minutes of pretending to watch whatever was on, I put the remote down and walked to the back of the house. There was a small window in the laundry room that looked over the backyard from a different angle than Mia's room. Lower to the ground. I don't know exactly what made me go there. Some instinct I couldn't name. I didn't turn the laundry room light on. I just moved to the window slowly and looked out. He was there, standing maybe 15 feet back from the fence, just at the edge of where the patio light reached. A man, ragged, dirty looking, wearing what appeared to be layers of dark clothing that hung off him wrong, like they were too big and too warm. His hair was matted. He was completely still except for his head, which was tilted upward, toward Mia's window. I don't remember making a sound, but I must have shifted or exhaled or something, because right at that moment, he looked down, directly at the laundry room window, directly at me. We stared at each other for what was probably 2 seconds, but felt like something much longer. His face was in shadow and I couldn't make out his expression clearly, but I remember his eyes catching the patio light just slightly, like an animal's eyes at the edge of a road. Then he stepped backward into the dark and was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't run. My body kind of locked up for a moment before I registered what I was supposed to do. I checked that the back door was locked. It was, thankfully. Then I went around the entire first floor, checking every window and door. Then I grabbed my phone and called the police, then the Harmons, in that order. The police arrived in under 10 minutes. The Harmons made it back about 30 minutes after that, cutting the reception short. 2 officers went through the backyard with flashlights and found a spot near the tree line where the ground was disturbed. Flattened weeds, a partial boot print in the mud. They followed the trail into the woods but lost it. They said whoever it was knew the area well. What got to me, talking to the officer afterward, was something he mentioned almost in passing. He said they'd had reports from other homes on that street over the past several months. Someone lurking near backyards after dark, standing near fences, occasionally trying door handles. He said most people who called it in only did so because a child in the house had noticed something first, but the adults kept dismissing it until they couldn't anymore. I thought about Mrs. Harmon's voice when she told me about Mia's phase. Slightly embarrassed, slightly dismissive. I still babysit occasionally, but not for the Harmons, not because of anything they did wrong. They felt terrible about the whole thing, honestly. It's more that I can't walk into that house without picturing that window in the laundry room, without picturing him stepping back into the dark like he'd done it 100 times before. Mia had been seeing him for weeks, telling her parents every night, and every night they told her she was imagining things. She wasn't scared when she told me he was out there. I think by that point she stopped expecting anyone to believe her. I don't know how long he'd been watching that window. I don't know what he was waiting for. I don't let myself think about that part too long. But I do think parents ought to listen to their kids when they say someone's out there. Just look. It takes 30 seconds to look.
I'd been living with David on his family's old dairy farm for about 6 months. The property sat on 40 acres of pasture and woods, with the nearest neighbor almost 3 miles down a gravel road. It was a Thursday in late October. We were having dinner on the couch and watching some documentary about deep sea creatures, when suddenly the dogs started barking, that throaty warning they usually saved for coyotes or strangers. David muted the TV, and we sat there listening. The barking continued, focused on the front of the house. I heard boots crunching on gravel outside coming up the long driveway. I got up and looked through the window. Our porch light was on, but the driveway curved behind a row of cedar trees, so I couldn't see who was approaching. The dogs were going crazy now, scratching at the door. David grabbed his phone and pulled up the security camera app. We'd installed 2 cameras after a string of rural break-ins this previous summer. The front camera showed a man walking toward the house. He was tall and wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hands were in his pockets, and his head was down like he was deep in thought. He stopped about 20 feet from the porch and stood there without looking up or calling out. After maybe 30 seconds, he started walking again and climbed up the steps slowly before stopping in front of the door. I stayed by the window, trying to see his face, but he was standing at an angle where the porch light only caught his profile. David walked to the door, but didn't open it. He called through asking if he could help. The man didn't answer right away. But when he did, his voice sounded almost bored. He said he was looking for the Hendersons. David told him nobody by that name lived there. The man asked if he was sure, and said it used to be their place. David explained we'd been there for 6 months, but the man neither responded nor made any move to leave. David asked if he needed directions somewhere. The man didn't answer, but we could see him move closer until he was maybe a foot from the door. We watched him put his hand on the doorknob. David immediately told him to step back. The man didn't move at first, then quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, he said he thought he smelled chili. My blood went cold. The kitchen window had been opened earlier for steam. I'd closed it after dinner, but the smell could have drifted out. David's voice got harder, and he told the man he was asking him to leave, right now. The man finally stepped back, but instead of walking down the steps, he moved to the side toward the window where I was standing. I jerked away from the glass. David called 911, and while he was talking to the dispatcher, I pulled up the camera app on my phone. The man was standing at the side of the house now, looking up the second floor windows. The dispatcher said a deputy was on the way, but was 20 minutes out. I kept watching the camera feed. The man walked around the back of the house, disappeared from view, then reappeared on the other side. He was circling the property slowly, like he was looking for something. David grabbed the shotgun from the closet, but didn't load it. He just held it in case. The dogs were still whining and pacing between us and the door. The man came back to the front porch and climbed the steps again. He knocked the same 3 times. David didn't answer. The man tried the doorknob, and it rattled but didn't turn. We'd locked it after the first knock. He tried it again, harder this time, jiggling it like he was testing how secure it was. Then he stopped, stood there for a moment, and walked down the steps. I thought he was leaving, but when I checked the camera, he wasn't heading toward the driveway. He was walking toward the barn where our truck was parked. We kept tools and equipment out there, and the side door didn't lock properly. David called the dispatcher back and told her the man was still on the property. She said the deputy was 10 minutes out. We watched the camera feed as the man disappeared into the barn. He was in there for maybe 2 minutes. When he came back out, he was carrying something long, like a pipe or a piece of wood. He walked back toward the house. David unlocked the door, stepped out onto the porch, and raised the shotgun without pointing it at the man. He told him he had the sheriff on the phone and a loaded gun, and he needed to get off the property now. The man stepped about 15 feet away. He looked at David, then at the gun. He sat down whatever he was carrying, and it clattered against the gravel. Then he turned around and walked down the driveway slowly, at the same pace as when he'd come up. David and I stood on the porch until the deputy arrived. The officer searched the property and found what the man had been carrying. It was a tire iron from our barn. No footprints or tire marks were leading away from the property besides the driveway. Nothing explained how he had gotten there or where he'd gone. The deputy took a report and told us to keep an eye out. That night, David and I didn't sleep. We sat in the living room with every light on, watching the security cameras. Around 3 in the morning, the motion sensor on the front camera triggered. The figure was standing at the end of the driveway, too far away to make out details, but I could see the shape of a person watching the house. David grabbed his phone to call the sheriff again, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. We moved out 2 months later. We told people it was for work, for a shorter commute, but the truth was, we couldn't stay. I was supposed to stay at my sister Sarah's cattle farm for 2 nights while she and her husband drove to Denver for their daughter's emergency surgery. It wasn't anything major, and I'd done it before, so I kinda knew the routine stuff. The farm sat about 8 miles outside of town with nothing but pasture and tree lines in every direction. There was only one gravel road in and out. Thankfully, Sarah had recently gotten security cameras installed after some equipment went missing from a neighbor's property the year before, so I wasn't worried. The first evening went exactly as planned. I fed the cattle around 6, locked the equipment shed, and let Ranger, their German shepherd, roam the property like he always did. After dinner, I settled on the couch with a book and some country music humming low in the background. The night felt peaceful until suddenly nearly all the cattle started bawling. I checked the clock. It was 15 past midnight. I stood up and looked out the window toward the pasture, but everything was just shadows moving against the fence line. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. The front pasture was the usual darkness and grass moving in the wind. I flipped through the screens, but everything looked perfect except for Ranger was missing from all the frames. I called for him. He always came when called, but this time he didn't. I called his name over and over, but he still didn't show up. After about 10 minutes, dread started to crawl up into my chest. Ranger didn't wander off. He was trained and knew this property better than I did. I grabbed a flashlight in my jacket and headed outside. The air was cold with wind cutting through the open pasture. I walked toward the barn, scanning for Ranger, expecting to find him cornered by a coyote or caught in some fence wire. Instead, I found the back pasture gate wide open and stopped dead in my tracks. I latched the gate myself 2 hours ago. I was certain. But standing there in the cold, doubt crept in. Maybe I'd rushed it. Maybe I hadn't pushed it all the way closed, and the wind had done the rest. I walked over and shut it properly this time, hooking the chain through twice. The cattle were still restless, moving in tight circles near the tree line. Something had spooked them. Back inside, I locked the door and sat down, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the camera feed again. The back pasture camera was working fine now. The front one showed nothing but an empty driveway, but I could hear the faint metal clanking coming from near the equipment shed. I went into Sarah's room and grabbed her old baseball bat from the corner of the closet. It felt stupid in my hands, but I took it anyway. I slid open the patio door and stepped outside. The wind had died down, and everything was too quiet now. Even the cattle had gone silent. But there was unmistakable movement from 2 directions at once. I could hear the crunch of footsteps in the grass to my left, and something scraping metal to my right. I crept closer to the edge and strained my ears to listen closely. There was a soft hum of an engine, stifling low whispers. I immediately dropped down behind the patio railing, heart pounding, and stayed still. From there, I could see the pasture near the tree line where 2 figures were moving through it. One of them opened a gate I hadn't even noticed was unlatched. The cattle started moving through it, quiet and orderly, like they'd been guided that way before. I caught headlights for a split second. The truck was parked back in the trees just beyond the fence line. The lights flicked on, then off. It looked like a signal. My stomach dropped. I started backing away slowly. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the bat. I was only a couple of feet away from the door when I stepped on a branch. It cracked loud enough to echo across the pasture. Both their heads snapped in my direction. I peeped out and screamed. One of them had swung an axe up from the ground. The other followed his gaze and locked onto my hiding spot. A single word, alive, passed between them as they broke into a run. Without thinking, I bolted for the house. Behind me, I heard them pick up speed, boots pounding against the ground. I could hear them getting closer. I made it through the patio door and slammed it shut, fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so bad that I almost couldn't turn it. The second I got it locked, someone grabbed the handle from the outside and yanked hard. The door rattled violently in its frame. I stumbled backward and heard footsteps moving around the house. They were testing the windows. The back door handle jiggled. A window in the kitchen rattled. I called 911 with my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I told the dispatcher that there were men on the property trying to get inside the house. She said deputies were on the way, 20 minutes out. I grabbed Sarah's bat and sat on the bathroom floor, watching the camera feeds. My heart was pounding in my chest. I was literally sobbing and praying that the cops would show up before it was too late. The men had stopped trying the doors and the windows. There were 3 of them, and they were standing in the driveway now, talking. One kept looking at the house as if he'd been waiting for word of approval to barge in. Another was on his phone and kept nodding. He disconnected the call, said something to his friends, and they started walking away. Maybe who was ever on the side had called him back. But then the one eyeing the house stopped, picked up a stone, and hurled it in the living room window. His friends laughed and dragged him away. By the time I heard sirens in the distance, they'd disappeared into the tree line. Ranger came back an hour after the deputies arrived. He was shaking and wouldn't let me touch him for a while. A patch on his side had been shaved. The deputies searched the property with flashlights. They found cut fencing hidden behind brush near the tree line, and fresh tracks running across the back pasture. When we counted the cattle, 2 were missing. The lead officer took notes and asked questions. He said it looked like a livestock theft. Probably professionals. He told me they'd try their best, but his face said it all. Sarah sold the cattle 6 months later. She leased the land out to a neighbor and never restocked. We didn't talk about that night much, but I knew it changed something for her. I haven't stayed overnight in the farm since. I just can't without reliving that night again. I still wake up to nightmares sometimes. In them, the caller permits them to break in, and instead of them walking away, they barge in. I agreed to watch my uncle's farm for 3 nights while he drove to Montana for a legal hearing. The property sat 12 miles outside of town, encompassing 90 acres of pasture and livestock pens, along with the main house and a few outbuildings. My younger cousin Emma and Grandma Helen were staying with me, which meant I had to be responsible. The first evening was routine. I fed the goats and the chickens. Emma checked the cattle while Grandma sat in the living room, working on a crossword puzzle. By 11, I finished my rounds, double-checked the gates, and went inside. Just as I bolted the door, the chickens fluttered in their coop. The goats bleated in short bursts, and the cattle shifted in their pen. But the animals did that sometimes. They could have sensed a coyote or fox circling the pens. So, I stood at the kitchen window and scanned the tree line, but could hardly see past 10 meters in the dark. I flipped on the yard lights, flooding the space between the house and the outbuildings. The animals started to calm. That's when I heard footsteps on gravel, coming from the far edge of the property near the fence line. I froze and listened. The footsteps were careful and unhurried. My chest tightened. I waited, hoping they'd pass by. Maybe someone was cutting through and didn't realize this was private land. But when even after 5 minutes they were still there, I decided to make my presence known and scare them off. I stepped onto the porch, turned on the floodlights that lit up the driveway and the front pasture, and banged hard on the railing with my fist. I yelled that the property was occupied and the sheriff had been called. The footsteps stopped. The property fell silent again. I stood there for a few minutes scanning the darkness beyond the lights. When nothing moved, I went back inside and locked the door. Emma was still in her room, and Grandma was asleep on the couch. I told myself it worked, and whatever it was had left. But 10 minutes later I saw movement again. A figure was standing at the very edge of the floodlight, just where the brightness faded into shadow. He was tall and as still as a statue. I stepped closer to the window with my heart pounding. The figure shifted slightly, then disappeared back into the darkness. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app. The camera near the driveway showed nothing. The one by the barn had a clear view of the pasture, but it was empty. I switched back to the window. but everything seemed fine. 5 minutes later, the figure reappeared near the livestock pen, closer to the house than before. They stood just long enough to be seen, then vanished. My hands were shaking. This wasn't someone cutting through, or someone lost. They were circling the property to test and watch. Over the next 20 minutes, the figure appeared 4 more times, each time a different angle and closer. And each appearance happened after I moved inside or turned off a light, or stepped away from the window. They knew where I was without ever getting close enough to see inside clearly. I realized with cold certainty that they were mapping my reactions. I grabbed my uncle's rifle from the closet and made sure it was loaded. I woke up Emma and told her to take Grandma into the back bedroom. I locked them in and told them not to come out until I said so. Emma asked what was happening, but I just told her to stay in there and not to open the door. I called our nearest neighbor, Bill, who lived about 2 miles down the road. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding groggy. I told him someone was on the property walking around and not leaving. His voice sharpened. He asked if I had a weapon. I said yes and told him I needed him to come over. He said he was on his way and told me to lock the doors and not to go outside. I called 911 next and told the dispatcher everything. She said a deputy was on the way, 15 minutes out. I positioned myself in the living room where I could see 3 different windows. The rifle sat across my lap, and every light in the house was on now. The figure appeared again near the livestock gate, standing in full view under the floodlights. I could see them clearly now. They were of average height and were wearing dark clothes. Their faces were obscured by a hood. They stood completely still with their head tilted slightly toward the house, like they were listening. In the distance, I heard sirens. The figure didn't move or react, just stood there staring at the house. Then slowly, they turned and walked back toward the tree line. By the time the deputy's car pulled into the driveway, the figure was gone. 2 deputies searched the property with flashlights. They found multiple sets of footprints in the gravel circling the house, the barn, and the livestock pens. The gate latch to the goat pen had been loosened, but not opened. One deputy took photos while the other asked questions I couldn't answer. He asked if they said anything or tried to approach the house. I told him no, they just watched. The deputy exchanged a glance with his partner and said it was probably someone casing the property who saw I was home and decided it wasn't worth it. But that didn't feel right. If they were just casing the place, why'd they make themselves visible? Bill arrived 20 minutes later and stayed the night on the couch with his shotgun across his knees. Emma and Grandma didn't sleep. Neither did I. We left the next morning. My uncle came back 2 days early when I told him what happened. He hired private security for the property after he sold most of the livestock within the year. I haven't been back since. What still gives me nightmares isn't the fear that they could have broken in. It's the certainty that my warning didn't scare them away. On anything, it confirmed my presence and showed them where I stood, what I'd do, and how long it took me to react if they really broke in.
Sophie, Marcus, Jade, and I had traveled to rural France for a wedding photography project that New Year's Eve. The ceremony was held at a chateau about 2 hours outside Lyon. The place was stunning, with limestone walls, ancient shutters, and grounds that stretched into vineyards and forest. The wedding wrapped up by evening. Most guests left for their hotels, but our plans fell apart. The small inn we'd booked canceled on us that afternoon. And by the time we tried finding something else, everything nearby was either fully booked or couldn't accommodate 4 people on short notice. Sophie mentioned the situation to the groom, Lauren, who'd had a few drinks and was feeling generous enough to offer an overnight stay at the chateau. He said we could use the sitting rooms and guest areas on the ground floor, but had to stay out of the east wing on the 2nd floor, specifically the king's room. It was off limits, he explained. Part of the building's history that they preferred to keep undisturbed. Sophie looked it up later and found a local legend about how a French king had been betrayed and murdered in that room centuries ago. Since then, it's remained sealed. The chateau marketed it as a part of the building's historical mystique. To me, it sounded like typical folklore that every old building in Europe claims to have. We thanked Lauren, watched him leave with the last of the staff, and settled in for the night. By 10 o'clock, we had the entire chateau to ourselves. Jade opened a bottle of wine from the cellar as we set up our laptops in the main sitting room to review the wedding photos and let ourselves relax. Midnight came and went. We toasted with champagne Marcus had found in the kitchen. Took some photos on the stone terrace under the stars. By 1 in the morning, Marcus was half asleep on one of the couches. Jade was scrolling through her phone while Sophie and I were sorting memory cards and packing up our gear. Suddenly, a loud, heavy bang echoed from somewhere above us so hard Marcus nearly fell over, while I flinched. Before we could figure anything out, another bang echoed through the building, followed by a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across a floor. Sophie pointed out it was coming from upstairs, but the chateau had been empty for hours, and we were supposed to be alone. Jade suggested maybe someone had come back, but there was no car in the driveway. We checked the front entrance, but it too was still locked from the inside, exactly how we left it. The banging continued above us from somewhere in the direction of the east wing. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his camera bag and suggested we check it out. None of us wanted to, but it felt better than sitting downstairs all night listening to those sounds. We moved through the ground floor first, checking every room and closet. Everything was as it should be. But the moment we reached the main staircase, the banging stopped. We stood at the base of the stairs, unsure whether to go any further. Marcus didn't want to. He reminded us that Lauren had been very clear about the east wing being off limits. Jade argued that we had to check anyway, because if something went missing, it would be on us. I said that it was probably just some old pipes settling in the building. The chateau's lighting was minimal at night, with just a few wall sconces casting long, uneven shadows. We climbed the stairs slowly. The second floor opened into a long corridor lined with doors to guest rooms and storage. At the far end, barely visible in the dim light, stood a heavier door with iron fixtures. It had to be the king's room. Instead of going all the way down, we stopped maybe 20 feet from it, close enough to see that the door was shut with the iron bolts across it, looking rather undisturbed, but there were unmistakable movements inside. We could hear the soft footsteps padding across the wooden floor. My mouth felt parched and my palms were sweaty. Someone was in there, and he wanted us to know it, because the next second, we twisted the doorknob so hard the whole frame rattled. Sophie shrieked and nearly fell as we turned and bolted, skipping steps but never slowing down to check who. We made it to the ground floor and into a sitting room, slamming the door and locking it behind us. We spent the rest of the night in that room, barely speaking, jumping at every creak of the old building. Marcus wanted to call the police, but we didn't know what we'd even say. Besides, Lauren had already warned us. We decided to wait until the staff returned. Dawn came slowly. By 7, we heard vehicles pulling up outside. The chateau was coming back to life. We met the staff in the main hall, 2 women who managed the property, and an older man who served as caretaker. We told them what we heard. The 2 women exchanged a glance before one of them told us how the king's room had been opened 3 weeks ago for restoration work. The Historical Society wanted to document the interior before sealing it again. The woman explained that the workers had reported problems like missing tools and displaced equipment that had been left overnight. One of the workers claimed to hear footsteps in the corridor when the building was locked. I asked if they caught anyone. She shook her head. No theft had been officially reported. The workers refused to continue, so the room was resealed. My blood went cold. Marcus asked if that meant someone had been in there the night before. The woman didn't answer directly. She said they recommended we leave soon, and that they'd be conducting a thorough inspection of the property. We packed our gear in under 10 minutes and left. The chateau staff never called us with updates. We never saw any news reports about an arrest or an intruder being found either. But the lack of knowledge doesn't stop me from reliving the horror every night, and wondering exactly what we had gotten into and escaped. And wondering what exactly we had gotten into and escaped.